for Nashville.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is a great turnout. Really excited to be doing this. This is our second year kind of putting together a panel before the season starts. We have a couple of vets from last year, a couple of new faces. I'm going to do some introductions. I'll kick it off with the first question. And the way this is going to work, it's just audience participation. Raise your hand. We'll pick on you. We'll, introduce yourself, your name, whoever, ask a question. So it'll be kind of like a press conference, which is the opposite of what we usually do. We're usually in your seats, and there's other people up here. So it'll be a good experience to be on the other side. So let me kick us off with the introductions. We have David Grubb from The Bird Writes and Pardon the Pain. We have Christian Clark from NOLA.com. Madison, Locked On Pelicans. Guillory from The Athletic. And of course, I'm your host, Shamit Dua. I write for In the Know. So I'll kick it off with the first question to our panel here. It's a little bit of a softball, but this will help the audience to get to know you guys a little better. How did you get involved in covering this team or just covering sports in general? Like, what brought you to the stage? And we can kick it off from Grubb. And I'm going to, for the closer people, I'm going to hand the mic. Yeah, this mic, and then you guys should be good on that mic. Yep.
Yeah, I'm the oldest one up here, so by far. But yeah, I've been in sports now since 2000.
Dang.
I started in Alexandria, Louisiana at KLAX, TV worker for Bill Bush with Jacques Doucet, who works at WNBA in Baton Rouge now as a sports director there. My career started there. I've worked in Springfield, Massachusetts, and covered a lot of things there, and eventually worked my way back to Louisiana, where I grew up. And I've been covering the Pelicans now for about a decade. Started with Ken Trahan at SportsNOLA.com and worked for him. Wrote for the Bird Writes, and then eventually bought it. So now I run the Bird Writes and the Bird Calls, and I'm glad to be a part of just this group. Just some great guys who do a fantastic job covering the Pelicans each and every year.
This one, yeah.
That one's for the computer.
Gotcha.
Hey guys, I'm Christian Clark. Went to school to do media, which is a terrible idea. I should have got a finance degree for sure. Now that I'm in my early 30s, I might mess that one up. I don't know. Did a couple internships at newspapers like the Forest Star Telegram, paper I grew up reading from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. My first job out of school was the sports intern at the Oklahoman, making $12 an hour and renting a room in some lady's house for $500 a month. Good learning experience. I got a job in Denver at a startup called Denverite that was bought by Colorado Public Radio. Worked for this company. It's now called DNVR. It was something way different when I was a part of it. And in 2019, I got this position down here open, and they got Zion, and Zion's stock was at an all-time high. So I was like, yeah, I want to do that. And got lucky and got this job, and I've been here 5 years since, and it has been quite a ride.
Time this one here. I'm Jake Madison, host of Locked On Pelicans. This is going to be my 15th year covering the professional Hornets Pelicans here in New Orleans. I had a background in writing, and when I was younger, it was kind of the rise of sports blogs about 15 years ago. I just felt like I should write and cover the team and started just blogging away for free, no money, steadily kind of working my way up on everything and just putting out content, plugging away. Got kind of picked up by Locked On. I've been hosting that show. This will be the 9th year of that now, which is kind of wild to think about. And it's just kind of turned into its own thing by doing it for that long, really.
I started off freelancing at the Advocate, covering basically every high school sport there is. Was extremely broke. And then I got hired at NOLA.com to cover Tulane.
Roll wave.
Hell yeah. And I did a year at Tulane, and then I was basically Tulane, and I was a number 2 on Pelicans. And at the time, the previous Pelicans writer, John Reed, his dad got sick, so he had to leave town, take care of his dad. So they wanted me to kind of split Tulane and Pelicans. And then at that All-Star break, the Pelicans traded for DeMarcus Cousins. So they were like, forget Tulane, you're doing Pelicans. And that summer, I officially got the Pelicans job. Took it from there, spent about a year at NOLA, jumped with the Athletic, and best decision I ever made going into year 7 at the Athletic. It's been a blessing, man.
I guess for me, I was raised by the forums, and back in the aughts, 2006, 2007, the peak of the Chris Paul era, there were a couple of forums. I think now it's called Pelicans Report, but it was Hornets 247 at that time. So I had this compulsive obsession about being right online. And so that led me to learn as much as I possibly could about basketball, so I could win arguments. And when I was posting on the forums, the Hornets 247 guys, which is now Bourbon Street Shots, or I guess what used to be Bourbon Street Shots, they reached out to me and they were like, "Hey, have you thought about writing blogs?" And I was like, "Say less, sign me up. I would love to do this." And the career's kind of gone from there. And I actually started. Jake was part of that.
Yeah.
When I signed on, so it goes way back, and it's awesome kind of seeing a lot of the faces that I used to, talk shit to. Thank you guys for coming. Great introductions. We can kick off the interactive portion. If you just feel free to ask us anything, really anything. Obviously, this is Pelicans related, but just kind of raise your hand, and if there's ever like a lull in the crowd, I will try to fill it in with my own questions. But you have a hand raised. Introduce yourself, sir, please.
I'm Sentinel, raised in New Orleans since 2002. Live in San Francisco now, kind of been all over the place, but back visiting for a bit. Huge Pelicans fan. Whether that's a good or a bad thing for my health is to be seen. But curious for the group up there. In your time covering the Hornets / Pelicans / New Orleans basketball teams, what is your favorite moment from your experience? If you could pick one highlight.
Guy jump down. There's a lot. There's a lot of just weirdness with this team, right? Somehow for them never being that good, they're never boring, really, which I guess is something. I'll take it back to the Hornets time when they had Chris Kaman on the team, and there was a whole lot of weirdness with that, but I think it was trade deadline day, whatever year that is at this point. It's like 2010, something like that, where he was just spending the day tweeting, I think, and was doing the eye emoji and things like that. We all go to the arena for the game that night, and it's the weirdness around all that, and him just being like, "No, I'm just messing with y'all. Y'all were eating it up and wondering if I'm going to get traded, and was just having fun with at our expense with it all." Eric Gordon told me a crazy story about him at one point where he basically kidnapped him and took Eric Gordon to Hawaii from Los Angeles and something like that.
It's a tough one to follow.
Yes. That was one of those moments where you're like, oh, we all maybe take this too seriously at times, right? If Chris Kaman is fucking with you, you're taking it too seriously.
I'll go with the obvious one. I'll probably say the Zion debut, just because you just felt the arena. It was just a different feeling that night. Just because, like CC said, the anticipation for Zion was so crazy coming in, and then you thought it was going to start in October, and you had to wait a couple months for it to actually happen, and then sitting there, and it was like, man, he's really not doing anything tonight. It's like Pop is double teaming him as soon as he touches the ball, and then the first 3 go down, second 3 go down, and then the arena's just losing it. I almost fell out my chair out the one of them threes. And that was just a crazy night, just because like it was like the hope you felt in the arena that night was like nothing I experienced, while covering this team.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Zion debut, like, I just remember sitting there next to you and Lopez and Jim Eichenhoff, and we were just, like, falling down, basically. I was like, oh, my God, I can't believe this guy is, like, hitting threes like that. I don't think he's hit 4 threes in a game since. Maybe he's hit, like, 1 or 2. I mean, it was just crazy. And we knew it at the time, too. It was like, I think we were saying, like, he's going to play the rest of his career, and he'll never hit 4 threes in a game again. It's just insane, and it's not a shot at him. But I would probably say I was there for that Clippers play-in tournament game when they clinched to go to the playoffs. I think that was just nuts because of the journey they had been on that season. Like, that season sucked. Like, I had to be really, like, combative at the beginning of the season because, I mean, Griff and Zion are like, hey, he's going to play the first game, and obviously he misses the entire season. And the vibes, like, couldn't have been worse at the beginning, and then they were good at the Pelicans, like, picked themselves up and got to the playoffs. And I mean, it was just fun to be in LA that night. Like, I didn't even get to see Willie Green make that speech on TV. I just, like, watched it on Twitter. But no, just that fourth quarter was great. And, like, the feeling that the team had afterwards was awesome.
And I want to add one more. I think the night the Pels won the Zion lottery, because I remember the day before being on the plane, and that was back when the Athletic had a beat writer for every team. So every team that was in the lottery, our editors called us and said, you got to write your Zion story if your team wins the lottery. And I remember being on the plane being like, I'm wasting my time right now. This is like, nobody's ever going to read these words. Why am I doing this? This is so stupid. And then, boom, it hits that night. And I remember sitting next to Jim Eichenhofer and Lopez and just being like, what the hell is happening right now? And we were like, okay, the Knicks are going to get it. The Knicks jumped up. He's definitely going to the Knicks. And they came down to Memphis and New Orleans. And I was like, oh, my God, our lives are about to change right now. This is crazy. And then it happens, and, like, everybody's running up to us trying to figure out what the hell is going on. That might have been the craziest night on the beat ever.
I think for me, just to be different, the year that when everything felt like it was over when Boogie got hurt, and then they make the trade, and it was just that locker room being around those guys. It was just fun to cover them when they were winning and went on that long winning streak and went on the West Coast trip and came back and just seeing Rondo kind of emerge as the voice of that team, and that was just a mix of personalities that was just weird to be around, but really fun. And then just as a professional, just being less professional, I guess, was sitting up with the balcony boys. The group that we had when I first started as a reporter, just sitting up with the guys in section 121 back then, and just we were loud. I was probably the loudest, getting told to shut up a few times, but we were fun and we really enjoyed it. We were learning it and learning how to deal with each other, and just kind of started those relationships that we have today for some of us that are up here.
That Cousins trade is a wild story. It occurred during All-Star media availability while Cousins was talking in New Orleans while there was a Mardi Gras parade down the street, essentially. Right? That was the year they pulled the All-Star game out of Charlotte, threw it in New Orleans last minute. It was like it was like Muse's Thursday, I think is what it was when that trade happened.
And AD won MVP that night.
Yeah, won it in the game, and it was like, they were like, Cousins, what do you think about New Orleans? You're here. And he was given like a generic answer, and someone literally whispers in his ear, like, you're being traded to this city. And you see him smile and was like, this city's the best. I always down here, right? Like, screw what Josh Hart says. Cousins said otherwise here, so.
No, I remember that night.
Nuts.
That was like one of my first years covering. That might have been my first year covering the Pelicans. And I remember writing my story post All-Star, like I said, AD won. So that was like, my whole night was AD MVP. And then the Boogie trade goes down, and it's like, I still remember my editor calling me, shout out Marcus Camouche. He calls me and goes, what the fuck are you doing? And I'm like, I'm writing my story. He's like, drop that story, go find Anthony Davis right now and ask him a question about Boogie. I don't care where he is. What are you doing? So I'm just doing laps around the Smoothie King Center, trying to find AD in like a back room or something just to sneak one question to him. And obviously I didn't get AD that night, but I just remember being like, what the hell is going on? This shit is crazy.
Didn't that lead to the NBA like moving up the trade deadline?
Yeah, that's like part of the
It's like
reason
February
why.
8th or 9th now, and it's before the All-Star game, right?
Because Cousins played in that game in a Kings jersey.
Yep.
Like, and they wouldn't let him put a Pelicans one on. He was like trying
Because
to.
they had a video of Demps and Vlade Divac in
Yeah.
the stands like on Saturday, and they were like, Demps was getting Vlade drunk so he can trade.
There's stories out of that. There's stories out of that transaction where like when he got traded, it was for so little, and Vlade gives an interview. He's like, "Yeah, yesterday the offer was more, and I didn't take it. Today it's the same team offered me less, so I had to take it." It's like, man, Delvin's doing a ton of things right. Didn't that one right?
My answer was going to be the Boogie trade too. I was at that game and I was kind of joking on Twitter because where I was seated was like just left of like Zach Lowe and Woj and all those other people, and I was just like joking on Twitter. I was like, if I get 100 likes, I'll go ask Woj where Boogie's going. And little did I know, as soon as I get to my car and leave the arena, like that thing happens, and I'm like, now I got to drive home. Like this is crazy. But that locker room was really special. When Boogie got hurt, I don't know if you guys remember, they signed Emeka Okafor. He was like 35 years old at that point. And Emeka actually played really well for the time. They had that little 10-game win streak. And in that locker, I remember after one of these games, AD like pulled out his phone and he FaceTimed Boogie while we were in the locker. And he was just like yelling at Boogie. He's like, "We don't need you anymore. We got Mech." And it was great. And then Rondo was like yelling in the background, just trash talking. It was, I think that year was a lot of fun on a personal level. But great question, Central.
I'm Jason. Been here for all my life, and all of y'all have been here for varying lengths of time. How would you say the fan base has evolved in that time? Because I feel like 10 years ago, we wouldn't all be packed in here. I think this is awesome. What say you?
That's a great question.
No, go ahead.
I mean, it's smarter. Because New Orleans is always passionate. That's the easy part, passion. But I think the fan base has gotten way more informed about the game, about the league, about the organization, about the team. And so the interactions you have with fans are far more detailed, I think, than they were when I started. I think people just wanted the team to be something. You know, like you never knew. It was always in flux. It felt like you felt like maybe they might move, or it was for the ownership when it was the Hornets, whether it was George Shin, you kind of felt like, is this team really going to stay? Does it have roots? And then once they got cemented with the Bensons and it became the Pelicans, I think people kind of let go of that part of worrying about the team and its fiscal future and its whether it would move or not, and it became about the basketball. So now there are just these really great interactions with fans about the game of basketball. I think that's the biggest thing for me.
It's because of this panel.
Hell yeah.
It worked.
And Mac.
Yeah.
I choke on my drink there.
I've only been here since 2019, so I can't really speak to like how it's evolved over time. But I guess my observation is someone from Dallas, like kind of an outsider, is like I think it's true in all sports that like when things are going good, things are awesome, and when things are going bad, things suck. But that feels like especially pronounced with South Louisiana sports fans. Like the Saints fans last year were like, I don't cover the Saints, but like just I watched it every week and noticed it, and it's like, oh my God, they're ready to like burn down the village and like.
You just said me. It was me.
Yeah, I
I
don't know if you guys know this. Guillory threw a break through Pete Carmichael's.
You're not doing it again, too.
But yeah, that's my observation. When things are good, it's the greatest. And when things are bad, it's just so bad. And that makes it fun. There's these crazy extremes that I think are even more pronounced than like any other places.
And I just think the evolution of social media and stuff like Twitter Spaces and Pels 12 and stuff like that, where I think it's dope to see how much the fans have been able to build their own communities and they get to know each other, and like through that stuff we get to know some of you guys, and like I know some of y'all names and faces just from Twitter interactions or doing stuff like this. And I think that's just dope just to see how much the fan base has grown and how much they support each other, they support us. I think it's really good just because people always talk about how the Pelicans don't have a fan base, people don't care. That's where the whole Pels 12 thing came from, and I just think seeing the passion that you guys show and the way y'all kind of come together, I think it's super cool. And I think just seeing where it is now versus where it was where I started, I think it's just night and day. And I think you really just see the passion of the fan base and just the different ways they find out how to, support the team. Even though, like, you hear from people like, yo, I live in Florida, yo, I live in New York, and I'm like a diehard fan. I read all your shit, and I'm like, damn, this is crazy. Like, and it's like you sleep on how much all the little stuff we do kind of touches the fan base and how much the fan base really supports us. And every time I talk to somebody, I always say, man, I appreciate the support that we get because we wouldn't be up here without y'all. And I think it's dope the way y'all have figured out how to, become media entities on your own. And like people always running up to Chris Conner and be like, yo, Twitter Spaces. Like, I think that's dope. Just finding your own path. And I just think just the way people, the way being a fan has evolved over time is dope to see.
It's been cool to see the fan base kind of coalesce and come together and stand up for themselves. I think over the past couple of years, the Pels 12, I think, is a big part of that. It's been the running joke of the NBA, it felt like, for a decade or two, maybe not two, but of like New Orleans doesn't have fans, right? JJ Redick even made the joke of like there's 12 of them. It's just easy to shit on the team, right? And shit on the fans as a result of that. And when JJ Redick made that statement, like basically a group of people kind of stood up and were like, enough. Like, we matter. This matters to us, and we do take it seriously, even if the team isn't always that good. And it was really cool to basically see the fan base just carve out space for them in kind of the overarchy of the NBA, I think, and kind of be galvanized together with that sort of thing and be like, no, we do matter, and this is important to us. And to kind of see that passion come out in very New Orleans style, I think it's been just truthfully like great to see. There's a community here. Will, to echo what Will has said, like, I know a lot of y'all, right? Like, I'll come up to you, you'll see me out, whether it's at bars or other places, dude. So like, it's nice to have that community, and that stuff just matters for, I'm going to sound super high right here, like the human experience with it all, right? Like, no, but it does. Wait a minute, bringing out the English major here.
It's family.
Yeah, that's like that. There you go. That's better for it. I kind of hate myself for that now. So, but like, it just shows that like these people matter. This matters to a lot of people, and I do think that's important. And to see everyone stand up for that has been wonderful.
I completely agree. I think New Orleans is unique in that there's a lot of accessibility here. With the media, we have a lot of accessibility to the organization, and you guys have a lot of accessibility to us. And I think there's people in the crowd and amongst and on Twitter and whatnot that they have their own connections with the team and the organization. So I think you're not going to find that in a lot of other cities. Those cities are too big, those organizations are too guarded, and there's too many barriers for that. And I think one thing coming out of like the whole pandemic and COVID that really that I noticed was that there was a big desire for the community aspect of it that Jake and Will talked about. Like when they made that playoff run in that Phoenix series, like people were packing out the bars, people were going to Mid-City Yacht Club to do the Pels 12. Like there's a real like tangibleness of this fan base that I think is difficult to recreate in other places. And honestly, like I have these conversations with Andrew all the time about trying to bring the community together to where it's like, hey, we're not just faces on Twitter. We're just not just like, like profile pictures or whatever. Like we're real people. And if we can continue to do events like this, or just the fact that we're even here, I think just speaks a lot to like what this fan base is. And like, it's the middle of September and you guys are here. Like games aren't even happening. Like, that's really cool to me.
Fuck with y'all at your own risk. The
Seriously.
level of petty and the level of ire when people go left of the Pels, man.
We all learned that the hard way at some point. We've all been a target.
I've been told to do things with myself on occasion.
Yeah, I got a question.
Who are you?
My name is Evan. Evan MPDX on Twitter. This is a topical question, given that my hometown was awarded a WNBA team today. You want me to speak on?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, sure. So, my hometown was awarded a WNBA team today. Very excited about that. Yes, clap for that. Very excited. So NBA expansion, this is a question I asked last year. It's always been kind of on the table for selfish reasons. Obviously, for the owners, they wanted to wait until the TV deal was in place before they expanded. It seems like the expansion is going to be Seattle and Vegas, which means one team from the West is going to have to come to the East. So you've got Anthony Edwards in the Timberwolves, you got John Morant in Memphis, you got Zion in the Pelicans. Not who do you want to move east, who do you think the NBA is actually going to have move from west to east?
I'll jump in. I think it's going to be Minnesota. I think it's Minnesota. They're further north, so the sun goes down earlier on there, so throwing them on East Coast game times more often than not, I think makes a ton of sense. If you also just look at the teams in that area, what division you put them in, and you have to redo the divisions on all of this, like they're just so close to Detroit, to Chicago, Indiana, like those group of teams, Milwaukee, like they're just so close that it just makes sense. As much as I would love to not stay up late watching West Coast games that end at like 1 or 2 in the morning and then just recording a podcast right after, it's not going to be the Pels.
Pelicans are tied to Memphis, it feels like. Whatever Memphis and the Pelicans, like that, being along the Mississippi, that rivalry, wherever those two teams are, they're going to be together.
Yeah, it feels like Minnesota's trump card is going to be we travel the most miles out of the 3 teams.
Yeah, that's their main argument. And I think they're probably going to win it with that.
Yeah.
Sure.
My hot take on this, and just its opinion, that I don't want to be the team that moves because I think when there's expansion teams, historically, if you look at them, they suck. They're just terrible. So if there's 2 new expansion teams in the West, I think it's 2 more teams that you can clean up on in the regular season in terms of wins. So it's just like, I'm cool with it.
I ain't mad at 2 regular season trips to Vegas.
Yeah.
Seattle's nice. Seattle Portland.
Hey y'all, Henry, I've been out here like 7 years. I know Jake was saying earlier, I feel like a big part of being a Pels fan is getting pissed off at the national media. I guess, but first of all, and I feel like Bill Simmons and Lowe had a good conversation in the last pod about the Pels. What national writers do you feel like actually like care about the Pels and have some insight on it? And then you don't have to answer to you, but which one do you think is maybe has the least insight? And sorry, Will, why is it John?
Y'all go first.
We have colleagues here that you can't throw under the bus.
I'll stay away from writers, but I think that the TV audience does the worst. When I watch, whether it's ESPN First Take or NBA Today or whatever it is, or even inside the NBA, or whatever you're watching on television, it feels like most of the time that these people have not watched the Pelicans. They take snapshots of certain moments and then you run with those and make that the narrative for the team. So I think that the television discourse on a daily basis, whenever it does get around to the Pelicans, and most often when it comes to the Pelicans, it's so much centered on exodus, whether somebody's leaving all the time, or the team is in disarray all the time, and there's not really a level of analysis when it comes to the basketball for the Pelicans on television. That's my big pet peeve.
I think the national media member who knows the Pelicans organization the best is C.J. McCollum for sure. Lowe like is obviously like you can tell he's well sourced in the Pelicans. Like he's talking to people. I think Simmons just I personally like Bill Simmons. I know a lot of people don't. I think he's just throwing out takes. I think his history with New Orleans is really interesting. Like when you read some of those like Super Bowl columns on page 2 from like 2001, like early 2000s, like he was like saying some wild shit back then. You know, like those columns, like they have aged in an interesting way. They're like, I don't know about this. You know, it's just a different time. Yeah, I don't know. That's my only thoughts on that. I don't think I have like great own thoughts about like other national media people.
I tune a lot of that stuff out because I don't think it truthfully matters a ton. It's annoying when they get things wrong and then you want to feel like the need to correct them from it being right online. Like I know that feeling a good bit. And also, I double a little bit as national media doing our Locked On NBA show. And I will say it is kind of fun to piss off opponent fan bases. Like it's fun to just throw something out there just to see what the reaction is going to be. So I wonder if some of it's that too. But like Zach Lowe, I think is someone that like I read and respect a lot and really learn a lot from. So when you find those people, like I'm a big believer in like curate the people that you want. Find the people that you like, that you trust, and just stick with them and tune the other stuff out. For me, Zach Lowe is one of those guys.
Yeah, I agree. I think Zach Lowe's probably my favorite writer who doesn't currently work at The Athletic. I think, like Jake said, I think I try to avoid all of the hot take artists, the guy who say crazy stuff on TV, because it is what it is. A lot of times, they just saying that stuff just to get a reaction, or they saying that stuff because they know it'll get them back on the TV show tomorrow. You talk to some of these dudes in real life, and they'll just like straight up tell you they didn't watch the team, or they like don't really care that much. They just say this shit just because. We ain't got to throw perk out this. But nah, I think I stand by. We give a lot of attention to these people who don't know what they're talking about, but for every one of them, I feel like there are 5 people at blogs, at websites, on TV who really put in the work, who watch film, who actually talk to players, who go to practice, who don't just tweet without actually sitting in the player's face and saying what you said online. I think we got to show more respect to those people, and the ones who don't, I try to ignore them.
Yeah, I think when it comes to like breaking news, I really like Windhorst personally. I think he has a good pulse on the Pelicans organization. I think Mark Stein has a really good pulse on the Pelicans organization when it comes to actual like analysis. Obviously, Zach Lowe's been mentioned here a few times. Not only does he do his homework, he'll go out of his way to have a guy like Andrew Lopez as a guest, because he'll bring in the subject matter expert to speak on it. So I think like Jake and Will have said, find the people that you really enjoy, and really just personally, in my opinion, and it benefits me a lot too, give the attention to the folks who have the works, right? Like I think elevate them, consume their media, and I guess like share it and whatnot. But that's where I'm at with that.
I have 2 questions. I'm gonna be greedy.
Who are you?
Nobody. I thought you want me to like that.
I'm just pointing in the direction.
I'm Jeremy. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Jeremy.
2 questions. I don't know if I spoke at this part about how Big Bang. What are your thoughts of Woj leaving the game and becoming the GM of a college team, which is another question itself? As well as picking up back off Evan, do you think the city could support a WNBA team?
I'll start off. Shams is my favorite newsbreaker.
I didn't ask
I'm just being honest with you.
Is he going to be your newsmaker for long?
Yeah.
But no, Woj is a legend. We all know that. I mean, Woj has been doing this thing forever. Everybody's following his lead when it comes to news breaking. He was an excellent columnist back in the day before he started doing the news breaking thing. And when you're really behind the scenes and really get to see, what he's done, the networks he's built, and like legitimately the people who fear him in the league, like it ain't like respect. There's legitimate fear when it comes to Woj. And to see what he's done to build that over time throughout the entire league is super impressive. And the amount of work it takes to be a newsbreaker, the constant phone calls, the text messages, the lack of sleep, the worrying about if somebody's going to scoop you. It ain't a life I want to live. I'll tell y'all like that. I'm happy with doing what I do. I break my little news every now and then. But what them dudes go through, like trade deadline, draft, free agency, the amount of time they put in to break news consistently at the rate that Woj did at the highest level, you got to respect that. And I think what you respect most being in the business that we're in, a guy like that being able to choose his own exit, because so many people that we know have been kicked to the curb, or the game has changed and they weren't able to evolve with it, and being able to walk away on your own terms and being like, yeah, I'm gonna leave $20 million on the table so I can just help out my alma mater. I think is super cool to see, and I respect him, and I wish him well. And I'll keep my up to myself.
That's pretty good, man. Like, look, credit to him for kind of going out his way. I think is the biggest thing. Like that job seems like it sucks, to be perfectly honest, right? Like that dude didn't sleep. It doesn't seem like there was much of a social life. When you've seen articles written about Shams, and it's like he's on his phone like 20 hours a day seems miserable, right? And so to just go and be happy, I think there's something to that. Like, this job is cool at times, right? We get to meet and talk to NBA players. We all sit courtside before games and kind of hang out and chat. And that's a lot of fun, but like, you're up till 4 a.m. sometimes recording a show, writing an article. You think you've written your article, then something happens and all of a sudden it's entirely different. Like, there's very unglamorous parts of that. So to kind of, for him to leave that behind, like, good for him, right? Like, go find that island and retire. He's found it being a college GM. On the WNBA side, like, yeah, I think so. You put any sport in here, right, is going to have passion. Might take a little bit of time to solidify, but if they're particularly winning, they're going to build a dedicated fan base. And whatever gets put in New Orleans, they're going to support it no matter what, right? Like, we know that people would show up to those. Look at LSU with Angel Reese and the rest of them. That was like must see, and everyone was tuning into that. I think you wouldn't get that level of support right away. You could build that, I think, eventually here.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jake hit it. Like, Shams posted his screen time during free agency last year, and he was like on the phone 19 hours a day. I mean, that just seems like not a fun existence. I mean, I like to go to the movies, like to go to dinner with my wife, like to go to the gym and swing the kettlebell. Like, I don't think those guys can do that, you know? I mean, I think they're just like on their phone, or they're sleeping, or that's it, you know? I mean, that seems like it sucks. So it's not a life I would want. You just have no balance. Like, there's no time to enjoy stuff outside of work. And like, shout out to him. I think like he's been in my life since high school, so it's weird to see him making this change. Like, I was like, you know, some dumb kid in high school getting on Twitter. I was like, oh my God, like seeing Woj's tweets and stuff like that. Like, his columns at Yahoo back in the day were just bangers too. Like, Woj, ESPN, he's not giving opinion at all. Like, he was editorializing when he was at Yahoo, and like incredibly sharp writer. I think like he pushed NBA media in the direct, and like this is the way it's going, but he pushed there in like access journalism. And I don't know, I felt like there's like a lot of gaps now to give people like the real of what's going on, because there's just a lot of stuff you can't say. You couldn't say to just like, you know, like that stuff at the highest level is a lot of favor trading. So I think like people at my level, well, you can fill the gap by like telling people what's actually going on a lot of time. Because like, if I piss you off, whatever, you know, like I'm not as concerned about relationships as him. But I mean, it seems great for him, and like you could tell his coworkers really liked him too, and I think that says a lot.
I want to jump in with one more thing here with Woj. Like, he made following the NBA, I think, a lot of fun. A lot of it just exists online, and particularly on Twitter, right? And when he would drop a Woj bomb out of nowhere and that whole site would just go nuts for the next hour, it made being a fan really fun, right? You would react to that. There's a lot of, oh my God, and all of that stuff. Can you believe?
Kicking an anthill.
Yeah, it's I'm genuinely gonna miss those moments where it's like a collective freak out with thousands of people that you don't know, and that's still, you're part of that community, right? We talked about that earlier. That stuff I think is important for the health of the league, and people just caring that when those moments break and it's an event. It felt like.
I mean, I'll just be brief and just say, I think it's hard when you're an insider and you don't appear like a shill. You know, like, I think there are times probably when you watch insiders, you're like, who do they really work for? You know, are they working for the league? Do they promote something? It always just felt like Woj was just giving you a straight, no chaser. So I just always appreciated that, is that it felt honest and real. Whatever information he was giving you, that there wasn't an extra angle to it that he was hiding from you. But as far as New Orleans and teams and supporting them, every time we've had a team, whether it's been the New Orleans Brass or the New Orleans Knight or the Voodoo or whatever, the only time they failed is because it felt like it's stuff that was in no control of the organization. Yeah. There's Katrina or something else, or bad ownership. You know, people didn't have enough money to be owning a team in the first place. But it was never on the fan base. You know, people showed up. Yeah. There were people. The arena was full for the New Orleans Knight. It was full for the Voodoo. It was full. Like, even when the Brass were at the theater, people stood over there watching the Brass hockey in New Orleans. People were watching it. So if you give them a product that's entertaining in this city, people will show up. They want to be a part of something. I think that's the nature of New Orleans, is being part of the collective. So we show up and we show out, because, as my man Chris said, if New Orleans is across the front of that, you know, I'm gonna represent that bitch. You know, that's how it goes.
Is Have a Laser on Woj's like best moment during the draft?
He has a lot of them.
Emailing Josh Hawley, fuck you.
Yeah, that's pretty good too.
To piggyback off what David said, just I think he even saw it with the Olympics. Like, no matter what sporting event it is, New Orleans consistently gets like the highest ratings when it comes to like viewing and experience. So like, there's no doubt in my mind if there was a team in New Orleans, a WNBA team, just like with the support of like, you know, as we mentioned with like LSU and like Angel Reese and HBL and all them, like it would be supported. I think we see a lot of jerseys in the crowd right now, you know, frankly, for sure. Back row.
Anand Kanwar. Been here for 10 years or so, off and on, but just moved back from Portland. I've always been curious about this for you guys. There's like the basketball side of things and there's the business side of things. But you guys aren't necessarily, obviously, went to college for this, you know, the contract legalese, trade structure, whatever is part of it. Is that something you just kind of picked up as you went?
To me, like salary cap and that type of
Salary
stuff.
cap all the business side of things.
Yeah, I think that's something that you just kind of learn over time, just reading. I think, you know, some of us have been lucky to just have people in your life who would explain that stuff to you. Like, I'm never a stranger to like hitting somebody in a DM or sending a text like, yo, what the hell is a second apron? How does this work? And I think you constantly have to learn that stuff. And now a new CBA has come, so we're all kind of relearning what that means and how that affects your team's movements and whatnot. But I think it's something that you constantly have to learn and constantly have to be on top of, especially with a team like the Pelicans, because like a lot of their moves are so complex and their contracts are very complex. I think that's one of the things David Griffin takes pride in. But yeah, I think it's something that you always have to learn. And I think one of the things I always say about the NBA community, I think we do a great job of really being together. And I think a lot of us, you know, are really great fans, whether we work for the same company or not. We go to these different cities and it's all love. We all talk to each other. We're all sharing information. And I think that's important just to be able to learn, because stuff is always going to evolve. Like I said, I think the business, the way you write, the stuff you're writing about constantly evolves, and you got to evolve with it. And I think that's something that, you know, we're constantly working on every day.
I think when I said earlier about my obsessive compulsiveness of like trying to be right, I think that played right into it. But to Will's point about having people in your life, like when I started off, Jason Connie's with Bourbon Street Shots, like he's like the smartest cap guy. Like I know, I constantly talk to him. You know, right now, like I'll talk to Keith Smith a lot. Just like, even if I feel like I know my stuff, I'm always double and triple checking with people. And the other thing I want to say is like this, you know, like with the CBA and all that, like that's not a niche that like everybody needs to know to operate in this space or to be successful. And I think it frankly hurts you if you try to act knowledgeable and you're just kind of half-assed it, or you don't know what you're talking about. Like there's plenty of writers out there that won't even pretend like they know it, and that's okay because they're covering. You don't need to know the contracts to know basketball, right? You can talk basketball. You can talk what's happening on the court. You know what's happening in front of your eyes, and you know you can also talk about like the major news events and how, you know, like the people aspect of it too. Like there's so many things that you can do in the media space, and contracts doesn't have to be any of it. You know, that's what I would have to say.
Shout out Larry Kuhn for years in the CBA FAQ. It's, if you want to learn that, it's just read people who are smarter than you, listen to people that are smarter than you, and try and absorb as much as you can. But like, you don't need to know it. It's helpful, I think, for added context and things, but it's like for people who want to get into this, like find your lane, find what you're good at, find what makes you special, and kind of focus on those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think that was the thing that I had to learn when I started was you think you have to know everything, but like your job is to ask questions. Like that's your job is to and there are a lot of people who are willing to give you answers. So you don't have to know all of the fine details. So like Jake said, once you figure out what you're really good at, stay in that lane and get the other pieces as needed. Like honestly, I learned from Schmidt that I didn't know shit about certain stats. Like he used to clown me in different ways, and we kind of had like an adversarial relationship about that shit because he was not good at being humble. So we used to be like, I'm like, man, don't talk to me like that. You can explain it better than that. And he was like, Grubb, and we would have these little passive aggressive shits with each other. But eventually I figured out he knows this thing better than me, and I could learn from that. And so I did my thing. Like, I love the game itself and certain things about it that I know that I'm good at. I know I'm good at maybe asking certain questions that other people don't ask. And so I focused on that. But the other parts are important at certain times, so I go get those people. And I think that's what you have to remember. Just know what you don't know and be okay with that.
I learned how to talk to people.
I'm
still working on it.
Yeah, I don't really feel like I'm that knowledgeable about the salary cap. I've learned it as I've gone. I mean, there's incredible resources out there at capsheets.com. Here's one thing I do know about the cap. The Pelicans aren't going to end the season over the luxury. That's one thing I've learned. I actually do think like some of the most interesting stories with the Pelicans like that have happened this summer and are going to happen are the business side, not necessarily the cap. Like the TV deal, I think is like a huge business story that like we're going to see that play out. And I think the other one is the arena. Like the arena to me is just a massive story for the next 5 years. The lease is up in June 2029. There's all these different facets of it, but that's a big one. So I think just like the high level business stuff, especially with this team, is worth covering.
And kind of building off of Grubb's point, I think it's extremely important to know what you don't know and just be good with asking questions. Like, I think so often you build relationships just by coming up to people and being like, hey, I don't know shit about this topic. Tell me what you know, help me out. Like, okay, you think my question was dumb. Tell me why it was dumb, what I should have saw on that play, why you didn't play this guy. I think so often you gain respect from people seeing you show that humility to be like, all right, I don't know this. I'm trying to learn. I want to figure some stuff out. I think that's an extremely important part of the job. And I think as you have those conversations, it'll stun you. And these guys will back me up. You'll have conversations with people and they hit you up like, hey, can they do that trade? Like, is that legal? And like so many of these people who are in prominent positions, they know just as much as we know, especially when the CBA is as new as it is. It's everybody's learning at the same time. So I think you don't have to act like you know what you're talking about or pretend to be somebody. You're not just, it's okay to be like, hey, I don't know what's going on here. Help me out. And I think that helps you grow relationships. It shows people that you're open to learning, and I think at the end of the day, you always should be open to learning. You should always be looking to improve. And I think that's a really important aspect of our jobs, just being open to coming up to me as somebody and just being like, hey, how does this work? What's going on here? How does this change affect what y'all did last time around? That type of stuff. And I think that allows you to gain relationships that you maybe didn't even have before.
The actual CBA is like a 300-page document. Like no one's actually read this thing front to back and is like, let me give you all the specifics of it, right? Like ask them for their thoughts on Infinite Jest if they tell you that they've read that too. So like, you know, you learn what you need to know to kind of like get by with this stuff.
All right, Zach grew up in the area, been a New Orleans basketball fan forever. I guess I'll pivot it to looking forward to this next season. Curious your takes on what our starting five is going to look like at the beginning of the season, and then will it be the same by the end of the season? Great question.
Oh, yeah. Who gonna piss him off first?
I'll make a starting five prediction. If I had to predict today, I think it would be DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, and Daniel Tice. That's been just my guess for a while. I'm not 100% on it. Yeah. And no, I don't think that would be the starting five at the end of the season.
Second. Next question.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that question? So I've been a Blazer fan my whole life. I moved to New Orleans, so I've probably watched more CJ McCollum basketball than probably anyone else in this room.
My brother played with him at Lehigh.
Okay. So he's like a stand-up dude. He's a great guy. It feels like that he might get the squeeze in the starting lineup. I predicted that we're gonna get the story where he goes to Willie Green's like, hey man, for the betterment of the team, I'll come off the bench. How do you think spending more time around him? I'm not close to him. How do you think he's gonna react to this? Will be the first year of him potentially coming off the bench.
I think CJ is a pro, and the thing for him is, in basketball at some point, it's not about starting, it's about finishing at certain positions. CJ's going to get 30 minutes, around that. And I think, but the thing to me is last year, CJ had the best shooting season likely of his career and adjusted to that role better than anybody anticipated. He said, he made the conscious decision, I'm going to be a better catch and shoot player. I'm going to reduce my opportunities in the pick and roll. I'm not going to do the thing, dominate the ball the way I had at certain times. I think CJ is definitely positioned to be an excellent sixth man in that role. The problem, of course, is you got another guy in Trey Murphy who is also super situated to be an excellent sixth man, and both of them need their minutes. CJ's not going to be the problem. Like, if anybody's going to fuck this up, it's not going to be CJ McCollum. He's going to come to work every day, do his job, be prepared. As long as he's healthy, he's going to be a strong contributor. So I think that CJ, he's suited to come off the bench because what he does translates whether you're a starter or a reserve.
All right. CJ has the quote that we're all familiar with. I get paid
Yeah.
in All-Star.
I literally look at Will and I'm like, I know what you're going to say.
It was going to be a
right?
race to the
And I was like, I want to jump in there and say, CJ's going to be like, I'm being paid like a starter.
Yeah.
30 mil cash.
He's a consummate pro. Like, if there's any resentment on his part or whatnot, y'all aren't gonna hear about it, right? Like, it's gonna stay pretty quiet.
No, and one thing I'll say about CJ too is since he came to New Orleans, I think he's gone out of his way to lead by example. Whether that was when he first got here, we always heard the stories about how quiet this team was, how nobody talks. And then there was the running joke during that summer where he was calling Z and BI on the phone constantly and they weren't answering. I think he does stuff like that all the time where, they needed more threes last year. So he shot more threes than he ever did before. I think he constantly tries to say, okay, I'm not a talker, but I'm going to show everybody how we need to move, how we need to change the standard right here. And I think that's why he's so highly regarded. And I understand the fan base gets frustrated with him at times, the style of play. When the shots aren't falling, it ain't that fun to watch. But I think they truly appreciate the way he moves on a daily basis and the way, even if dudes don't listen to him all the time, they have a tremendous amount of respect for him, the way he moves as a pro and the way he takes his job extremely seriously. And I think you see what a lot of these guys, I think a lot of times in the NBA, there's the dudes who are extremely talented and the dudes who work extremely hard. And I think CJ falls in that latter category where he works extremely hard, and you can't help but respect that if you're one of those guys because he is where he is right now because he worked to get there. And I think that's something that a lot of guys appreciate.
Pretty talented too.
Yeah, for sure.
Benjamin, I actually run a show here every month. Shout out to Andrew for letting me do that.
What's the show?
It's called Moral Panic. It's actually this Friday. Come by, it'll be fun as well.
Nice tickets through Saturday because we got to get through the summer together.
But yeah, we know the Pelicans are going to play a smaller bunch. People refer to those lineups as like Zion at the 5, but I don't think he's going to really be a primary defender on 5s. Who do you guys think is actually the primary defender on 5s in those lineups? And what do you think about 10-foot wingspan BI being that person?
I think anytime you ask a defensive question, I think the answer is always going to be Herb Jones. That's where I'm always lean. So I think even if it ain't Herb starting at the 5, they're going to figure out a way to put Herb on 5s. Herb's going to just guard whoever he needs to guard. And I think, they experimented with it a little bit last year with Herb at the 5. They were doing some stuff with him setting screens and, making plays on a short roll and stuff like that. So they're starting to get there. A lot of it is going to be matchup based, right? Because you can't go small against certain teams. So they're going to have to figure that out. But I think more times than not, if there's a problem, they just throw Herb at it and they just figure it out from there.
Yeah,
Herb is Flex Seal.
Yeah.
So just start the Defensive Player of the Year hype for Herb Jones. If they play small a bunch and he's guarding 5s and playing that Draymond Green role on defense and doing it well, people are going to pay attention to that, I think.
I think you're asking, one of the questions, if they're really going to play small a ton, well, who actually is going to guard the other team's biggest player? I mean, it's got to be Herb, Trey Murphy, Brandon Ingram, or Zion Williamson. Zion in the past is just he doesn't think of himself as a big man. I think he thinks of himself as a guard almost. I think it's just weird for him to like function as the center. And I don't know. I wish I could tell you more. Like that's something I'm really curious about, and I don't know.
Yeah, what is going to happen and what could happen are both very different questions. I think honestly, and I had this conversation on a pod with Chris Conner. I was thinking, honestly, Brandon Ingram at 6'8", look, has to start defending more fours and make himself with this group. If he's going to start at the 4, in a small ball lineup with Zion, the nominal 5, then I think BI has to be somebody who gives you more relief at the power position. Physically, he's the most capable of doing it. Trey also gives you power forward body length, and we've seen Trey as a defensive rebounder do a really good job opposite Zion Williamson. So I think there are ways, but it's still hard when you don't have length. I mean, the Pelicans only have 3 players in their rotation who are taller than 6'8". 6'8". Not 6'9", not 6'10", 6'8". So they are a short team, and it's going to be a challenge against some of the very long teams, like in their own division with Houston. That's got a lot of length up front and different size with that length as well. Same with Memphis now with Jaren Jackson Jr. and Zach Edey. So, I mean, there are a lot of challenges, and I think that is the ultimate question defensively is how do you deal with 5s on a night-to-night basis? Because for Herb, the one issue you've had is that there are nights where he gets a quick whistle and there are 2 quick fouls in the first quarter or something. And if Herb goes to the bench, now what do you do? Because you're asking everybody to rotate. And I think, Christian made a great point is that Zion, as much as we want to say he's a 4, he's really more of a perimeter player who gets into the paint and doesn't view himself as a guy who's going to physically dominate. When we saw him defensively do really well last year, it was as a help defender, as an active guy, as when the tempo was going, he could make strips and do things like that. But he's not going to ever be a guy who gives you 10, 11, 12 defensive rebounds on a night-to-night basis, who gives you a presence in the paint. So it's a job that falls on a lot of different people in different ways right now.
I think one thing that's interesting is when they go small, they're going to switch everything by default. So I think it's a little bit less important who's primarily on the big man, because when you're switching everything, the opponent offensive game just kind of becomes who can we pick on defensively, right? Who is the pigeon, as the term the Pelicans like to use. Now, in the past, it's been Zion when he's not been in the shape that he needs to be. And I think towards the end of last season, teams slowly found out that he's not the pigeon. Like you pull him up to the screen, he might blitz you and get a steal and dunk it on the other end, right? So if we're getting that version of Zion, I think opponent coaches will have an interesting choice on who to pick on. And I don't know if there's necessarily a right answer. It may just end up being the big man because that offers the biggest advantage on a switch. But I think, the Pelicans are definitely going to try to switch everything. And to David's point about Zion as the helper, he's actually graded out really well analytically as a help defender, as that low man who sits in the corner, who shifts over to the paint, comes for those weak side blocks. So I think if I'm the Pelicans, I try to put him on whoever's in the corner, regardless of that matchup is, because I think of the closing 5, quote unquote, he's probably the best in that particular position. And then if they want to bring him up for a screen from that corner, that's fine. You kind of live with it.
I got a quick piggyback off that. Okay, so I know the answer to this, and it's Willie Green, but what? So my question is, everyone talks about. Will mentioned there's 8 teams: Nuggets, the Timberwolves, the Lakers. You can't guard with your current personnel, but take CJ out. You have 5 guys with 7-foot wingspans, and I understand there's certain guys that you can pick on, given foul matchups, given whatever. Why don't they ever flip the script and say, how the fuck is Nikola Jokic going to guard one of the fastest 5 people on earth? And I know that it's thought of as these. You have these true anchors: Gobert, Anthony Davis, like Embiid, these guys that can maul you. But I genuinely don't understand if the true offense is built around getting these guys in space, because a lot of times these guys play with another anchor. So it's not just Rudy Gobert in space. You have to have Karl Anthony Towns guard the second worst offensive player. So you have Karl Anthony Towns guarding BI, Trey for 30 minutes a game. These are the things that I just wish we would flip the script and say, how do we be the aggressors and not how do we be the defenders of other teams' aggression?
Yeah, I think we saw some of that last year where they started playing Zion at the 5 a lot, during the latter half of the season. And I think a lot of that is dictated by Zion's ability to like you said, be active, be able to guard different players on the perimeter on switches and stuff like that. And you saw him improve over the course of the season as he got in better shape. But also to Shamid's point, I think a big part of that is like everybody kind of chipping in. I think I can bet you now that's what we're going to hear at media day when we ask all of these questions. They're going to say it takes everybody to chip in. And I know that's like coach speak, but I do truly think it's going to require Trey, DeJounte, all of these guys to pick up their effort. They're going to have to fly around more. They're going to have to work together because it's not going to be their answer is not going to be Daniel Tice to shut down Nikola Jokic. That's just not going to be it. It has to be everybody helping, everybody getting involved. Flying around on the perimeter when there's making switches, they're on time. Doing all the right things. And I think that's going to be the big thing. Everybody really making a commitment to playing together on a defensive end. And we've seen with this team, when they do that, they have the athleticism, they have the length when they're putting Herb, Trey, B.I., all of those guys out there. But it's got to be a consistent commitment from all those guys to, be on time with all of their rotations, to hit the boards, to run in transition, to do all the little things. And I think we look at this roster and we see all the talent, but I think what's going to determine their success this year is how much they're willing to commit to do the little things and help each other. And we're not worried about what your box score is at the end of the night, but really helping each other and really commit on the defensive. And that's what's going to take this team to the top.
This really is three things that a coach is going to look for. If you're going to play small, you got to win the defensive boards. You have to. You can't turn the basketball over, and you got to get early offense. You're going to get beat in the half court if you are plotting and not moving the basketball offensively. So those are going to be the things. And then it's also going to take, particularly for DeJounte Murray and Herb Jones, their rebounding is going to be huge on a night-to-night basis. Those are guys, DeJounte Murray, Herb Jones are going to have to be guys who get 7, 8 rebounds consistently from the guard position because you're counting on Zion to pull. If you're going to pull that big man away, so that means your guards have to rebound more. And so that's, it's a 5-man effort. And even the best teams that we talk about with small ball, like when you go and cite the Golden State Warriors, they only played that 10 to 11 minutes a night because it's so hard to consistently keep that pace and to do all those little things over and over again. And that's a disciplined veteran group. The Pelicans aren't doing this as a group again for the first time and trying this mix. So don't be surprised if it's not perfect when they start.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Like playing up in your position, it's like physically taxing. It's difficult on you. And like, how do the Pelicans balance that? Of we want to play small a lot, but we're trying to get these dudes through an 82 game season. Draymond is just a freak, and they didn't do it that much, but he's just a different guy. That's a really interesting part of this. Is does that grind you down in a way if everybody's playing up a position all the time?
It's also faster, right? A lot of this season's going to be about Zion being healthy, and he kind of proved it the past year. But if you're throwing him in different situations that he's used to, it is, to Christian's point, does that grind him down? Does that take him out? They can build whatever lineups they want. They try to kind of go away from the Zion-centric offense just in case he got hurt last year, and that didn't work. So they're still going to kind of throw it all on him, and you've got to find a way to keep him healthy all year long because their season's going to go as he goes in this sort of thing. The Warriors are known for that depth lineup. I literally just did a show on this earlier in the week on it. They didn't start that lineup, right? They were starting Zaza Pachulia out there in some of those kind of centers where you're like, huh, who is that? Because they couldn't do it the whole game, and it's about strategically deploying that lineup, I think.
And if I'm the Pelicans, the team I'm looking at is OKC last year, where I think going into the season, a lot of people talked about Chet Holmgren at the 5. Would he have the physical presence down there? And, of course, he was an excellent rim protector, but they were, one of the best defenses in the league, the number 1 team in the West, because they just play harder than everybody else every night. They sacrifice for each other, and it wasn't like Chet was grabbing 12 rebounds a game. They were just out there working together. And I think that's the example the Pels got to follow, where you see Shea consistently playing hard on defense every night, even though he's got to score 30. Jalen Williams, regardless of his shot attempts, he's committing on the defensive end. They all play together. They play for each other. And I think that's going to be the big question for this Pelicans team, especially with the uncertainty about the future. Nobody's asked about it, but we got to get into it. We don't know where's B.I. going to be next year. We don't know what's going on with CJ. We don't know what a lot of the team is going to look like next year. And I think their willingness to commit regardless of those questions, I think is going to be one of the biggest questions this season.
the last point on this, and Grubb kind of touched on this, is the other side of turnovers is turnover generation. When you play small, you have to turn the other team over. You have to generate steals. You have to be in the passing lanes, and that helps you play in transition. That helps you stay out of the half court. And I think, with DeJounte Murray and Herb Jones, who've been top of the league in steals, over the last 3 years or so, and Jose, of course, right? He's off the bench. They have the ingredients to kind of play that style.
If you look at the archetypical roles on that Warriors depth lineup, a lot of those players do. You see those archetypes in these players on this team, and there's a version of that can be really good. It requires a lot of sacrifice, I think, is to Will's point, and how much can you run that even if it's the best lineup is kind of the big question to me.
So we've been encroaching upon Sean's trivia time, and honestly, the time got away from me. But we have one final question over here. Go ahead.
The pressure of the last question. First and foremost, Briard, nice to meet all y'all. First and foremost, thank you all for doing this and everything y'all done throughout the years. As born and raised, New Orleans fan, y'all, each and individually and together, as collectively, done so much for the fan base, for the team, follow as a fan. It's been fantastic. So thank you all. Getting the last question, you kind of touched on it a second ago. I know it's an impossible question. That's why I started with so much niceties. But I think it's the question, both for this season of the team and for the future. What happens with BI? Where does this end up?
I think the honest answer for all of us is we really don't know. It's still kind of up in the air. They're still figuring it out. I think they thought it was going to look one way at the start of the offseason, and it looks completely different, and that's kind of life in the NBA. Yeah, and that's we talked about the new CBA. I think everybody in the NBA is kind of adjusting to life with this new CBA, what the roster builds are going to look like, how you allocate some of your money, and I think, unfortunately, Brandon Ingram is one of the first examples of a guy with this new CBA where I think the whole NBA is kind of saying, we don't know what we should be paying this guy, we're pretty sure you're not a number one. You might not be a number two. We acknowledge you're very talented, but with all that being true, you're probably not a max guy under this new CBA. And if that's the case, what exactly should that number look like? And I think that's what everybody's trying to figure out. I think, there's going to be more players like that. I think you already see Julius Randle being a hot topic in New York. I think there are going to be a lot of guys in that category where our teams are going to look at them and say, you're a very talented offensive player, but how far are we going if you're one of our two max guys? And I think B.I.'s in a really tough situation where he obviously wants what he feels he's owed or what he's earned in this league. But it's a new world in the NBA now, and everybody's trying to figure it out, including the Pelicans. So I think it's going to be an adjustment for everybody. I think he needs to show some level of sacrifice to prove that he's worth what he thinks he's worth. And I think a lot of the questions around BI are centered around, what are you willing to do to win? How much are you willing to change who you've been throughout your career to win? And I think we've seen him do little pieces of that throughout the course of his career, but I think he needs to do it more than ever before, that he's ever done it this year, to show, what he thinks he's going to be in the future. And I think, he's communicated to them that he wants to be in New Orleans, but I think with the way they built this roster, I just think it's going to be tough for them to figure that out. But I think he needs to show who he wants to be, just in the NBA in general. And I think that's going to be the question for him this season.
Will said it really well there. He's just an unfortunate first test case of kind of the new collective bargaining agreement, the second apron that's kind of scaring a lot of people in there. And, he's going to need to balance kind of trying to figure out who he wants to be, being the number one guy, what, as you said, he thinks he's owed versus what's going to help this team win and sacrificing for that. And when you're kind of in a contract year now, how do you balance those two things? Can that derail the season? Is he willing to sacrifice, help the team win, which might help him get paid, might not help him get paid if his stats are lower, those sorts of things. It's probably the number one thing going into the season that we're kind of keeping an eye on.
I mean, it's him and Trey, because they're linked together. I don't think you can separate one from the other, because if you didn't have a Trey Murphy on your team, then how you look at Brandon's role is very different. But Trey also being a restricted free agent at the end of the season, and his value, his age, and his skill set in this league, it's Brandon plays a style of basketball, or has been playing, because we've seen him play a different style of basketball earlier in his Pelicans tenure. The style of play that he's working right now is not necessarily the most complimentary to Zion Williamson. And if the Pelicans are committed to Zion for for however many years, having maxed him out, and you're an 8th place team in the league, and it doesn't matter that you got 49 wins, you're only what you are relative to the rest of the West. And over the last 3 years, you're an 8th place team essentially. So you can't max everybody out and still be in that position. If they win a lot, then that changes the discussion kinda, because still, are you willing to commit max money long term for a player who's of your rotation guys has been here the longest and is going to want the most money, when you have other guys who, you're not going to get a second discount with Herb Jones the next time around. And Trey is not going to give you a hometown discount when he knows that people are going to offer him max money around this league. So I think it's just a really difficult position for the Pelicans to be in. And ultimately, it's a test of both sides, whether Brandon wants to sacrifice statistically in order to prove something to the rest of the league, or is he going to try to fit maybe a square peg into a round hole?
Yeah, I mean, is the world, whether it's this summer or next summer, is the world ready for Trey Murphy to be a $150 million man? I mean, it's the confidence is already high. I think it'll be really high after that. But look, when I just look at this roster, I mean, I think it's difficult from a financial perspective. Zion, Brandon, and Trey Murphy, to just all three of those guys play forward. It's just hard for me to imagine the Pelicans having all three of those dudes on the roster 2 years from now. I think they're just gonna have to make some choices, and 2 of the 3. And right now, it looks like Zion's the guy, right? And there have been some incredible twists and turns in these 5 years. So I don't know what the general consensus will be 6 months from now. But I look at it, I'm like, Zion, Trey Murphy, Brandon Ingram. It'll be hard for the Pelicans to just afford all those guys 2 years from now. And I don't know which 2 of the 3 it'll be, but it's just hard for me to envision all 3.
I think, to echo what all these guys have said, there is a financial reality. Going back to what Christian said in the first place, they are over the tax right now. They don't really have many movable salaries. Brandon Ingram is an expiring contract, so it just kind of makes sense for them to do a deal with somebody that gets them underneath the tax and buys them sufficient cap room for the next year when Trey Murphy's deal goes from about $4 or $5 million to $30 million a year, right? So there's a fine needle that they have to thread in any Brandon Ingram trade, and it's so much harder to do that with, say, a CJ McCollum, because what the league is going to do is they're going to ask you for 2 picks to take on CJ's contract, right? And that's not something you want to do just to kind of accommodate Brandon. And I think the writing is on the wall. The writing's been on the wall for a long time. It's just a matter of when this is going to happen. One thing I feel really confident about is we're going to get to media day in 2 weeks, and they're going to pretend like none of this is an issue. They're going to be like, nope, Brandon's bought in, and we're bought into Brandon, and actually, this is going to be great. We're going to play this faster. I don't know. They're going to have a lot to say about it. And I feel very confident they're going to downplay this. But that's where we're at with that. Any final remarks on this question? Cool. Well, I really appreciate you guys. Let's give it up for the panel. Shout out to every one of you for coming. I'm very, very happy that this was possible. Thank you, Andrew, for hosting. Thank you, Sean, for taking this time. And, we'll try to do these on a somewhat regular basis, or at least do live shows or something. Thank you guys for coming. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.